just can't live without you. I don't know what to do. I just can't live without you. I don't know what to do. I just can't live without you. I don't know what to do. I just can't live without you. Listen to me. You've got me hooked. You got me bound. I can't stand it when you're not around. I shake and shiver when you're out of sight. When you're near, I gotta hold on tight. I don't know what to do. Oh no, I just can't live without you. I know. I don't know what to do. Yeah. I just can't live without you. Hey, you build me up when I feel down. I'm gonna spread the word all over town. Only you can turn me on. I gotta have you from dusk till dawn. I don't know what to do. Oh yeah, I just can't live without you. Can't live without you. I don't know what to do. Oh no, I just can't live without you. Like roses need rain, I need you to ease the pain. When I'm feeling blue, you see me through. There's no one like you. I don't know what to do. Oh no, I just can't live without you. No. I don't know what to do. I just can't live without you. When I'm with you, I feel I'm in heaven. You on my mind 24/7. You're the spark that ignites my flame. I've got to have you again and again. I don't know what to do. I just can't live without you. No. I don't know what to do. I just can't live without you. Ah yeah. I don't know what to do. Ah yeah. I just can't live without you. Can't do without you. Yeah. I don't know what to do. I just can't live without you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Brinks-Mat robbery part 4, the aftermath. And what I'm going to take this time is to thank everyone and greet everyone in the chat. So first off, I just want to say hello, Roscoe. Yeah, absolutely. We can cover more of those characters. We can go through them and maybe potentially hook up and talk about some of Glasgow's past underworld. Hello there, Janie. Great to see you. Thank you for coming, as always. And my new friend, great. Thank you for coming, Mr. Balding. Thank you. Hello there, Paul. Great supporter, great follower. Thank you, Paul. Appreciate you coming here. Excellent. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to play a recap of the story so that we can get right into it, because I know that obviously it's a weekday and we're going to be quite pressed for time. Okay, so I'm going to now go here. Recap of part 3. The heist was a success. Mick McAvoy, Brian Robinson, Tony White, and the rest of the robbers came away with an unexpected £26 million worth of gold bullion, as well as diamonds and cash. The gang were to go about their normal life directly after the robbery, but Scotland Yard are coming after them. And the robbers all have been instructed by Mick, straight after the robbery, to continue and go about their lives as normal, not to raise suspicion. However, the Scotland Yard have investigated all the guards and questioned all of them, and more importantly, Tony Black, who was Brian's brother-in-law, and he was in on the raid. under great scrutiny and intense questioning, he has cracked and signed a full confession. Now, Mick, Brian and Tony are unaware of this, and they are now put in 3 separate police stations in Chiswick, West Drayton, and at Heathrow as well. Now, we've also profiled Henry Milner, who is the top defence lawyer for the defence, and we've also as well touched upon Ken Noy and Brian Reeder and their skills at smeltering the gold and obviously dealing in precious metals, and as well have touched on Ken about his VAT scam. Now, as I want to say, as I always do, this information that is provided in these videos is in the public domain. Parts of this story, I say, are true. However, all facts cannot be verified as 100% accurate. This show is for educational, entertainment and satire purposes. Please enjoy the live. Hello there, Bambi. Thank you for coming. Right, okay, I'm going to get to it now. So we're going to pick up from where we left off from yesterday. Okay. Right. I'm going to go on to Avatar. Okay. Right. Now, the true origin of the ingots of gold had to be disguised, and that meant removing identification numbers and assay marks. Now, many ingots carried their own individual design hallmarks to signify their purity, and in some cases a serial number. Now, absolutely pure gold does not exist. Some contamination is always present. However, expertly, the metal has been refined, but bars with the number 999 meant that they were 99.99% pure, the highest level to which metal can be refined. While 999 bars, known in the trade as 10 tola bars. Now, a tola is being an ancient Indian unit of weight, where only marginally less pure. Now, to pull off any scam involving gold, any villains or receivers to whom it was sold, as well as removing the identity marks, had to disguise the purity of the bars. Failure to do so would create a risk that legitimate traders would quickly become suspicious that the quantities they were being asked to buy were either smuggled gold or stolen bullion. That meant specialised smelting equipment was needed, the sort sold by only a handful of shops in Britain, most of them in the Hatton Garden area of central London. Internationally renowned as a centre for the jewellery trade, such shops were on their guard against suspicious customers ordering smelters, so the gang would have to tread very carefully. Now, a month after the robbery, Flying Squad Officer Bill Miller got a tip-off that a man had been seen in London's Hatton Garden jewellery district trying to buy an industrial gold smelter. A week later, Miller was undercover in Worcestershire, watching a smelter being loaded into the back of a gold Rolls Royce. He was easy to follow because the smelter was too big for the Rolls Royce and the boot wouldn't close, explained Miller. So he followed him all the way back to Kent. The car was parked up outside a cottage while the driver went inside. Miller stayed with the vehicle all night and was relieved by a specialist surveillance team in the morning. Now, when the driver returned to the car, the team followed on behind. Within 5 minutes, they lost him, Miller later recalled. When they returned to the cottage later in the day the smelter had gone, the driver of the Rolls Royce was a man called Mickey Lawson, who happened to be the best friends with Kenneth Noy. Lawson and Noy's children knew each other, and their wives played squash together. Lawson had actually purchased a smelter from William Alday and the company in Stourport on Severn. The Rolls Royce was soon to be regularly seen at Noy's house in Kent, and one of Lawson's fingerprints would be eventually found inside that same house. Okay. Yeah. Now, the operating instructions for the smelter they had seen in the back of the Rolls Royce were later found in Kenneth Noy's shed. Lawson later insisted to police that the furnace had been bought by him on behalf of a mystery Arab who had taken it from him shortly after he'd purchased it. Lawson claimed he bought the furnace under a false name for VAT purposes, but the weeks and months following the robbery, Lawson was one of the villains who found himself under the watchful eyes of detectives. Besides increasing their knowledge of the gold business, the Brinks-Mat gang also had to constantly keep improving their contacts. Successful fencers would always be looking for new ways of cultivating police contacts, but with a haul like the Brinks-Mat, making new contacts to help turn the gold into cash became an urgent need. The gang members already in custody had their own favourite detectives to whom they had constantly suggesting ways in which they could help each other over certain matters. But the gang also began to speak to more and more members of the criminal fraternity, something that made them increasingly uncomfortable. Meanwhile, new members of the gang's outer circle were starting to get more deeply involved following the arrests of McAvoy, Robinson and White. Now, take Kenneth Noy. He took on a senior role, much to the annoyance of the actual robbers, who nonetheless had little choice in the matter. Noy was a master manipulator and prided himself on having his fingers in dozens of pies. From bent coppers to crooked judges, he boasted of owning an MP in southeast London. Noy befriended a blonde woman who was working as a civilian at a Kent police station, not far from his house in West Kingsdown. Noy persuaded the woman to meet for a drink after work one night, and they began a passionate affair, and she provided him with information about the progress of the Brinks-Mat investigation. When Noy discovered he was sharing the woman's affections with the senior detective, it only made the affair even more exciting and productive. Once the police began to watch Noy more regularly over the coming months, its surveillance team soon established that besides gold, Kenneth Noy had an obsession, women. He was even finding time to have an affair with Jenny Bishop, the wife of one of his oldest friends, and had bought her £50,000 townhouse in Dartford at the time, which he'd furnished from upmarket Harrods at a cost of more than £20,000. So in today's relative prices, that'd be 250 grand and £60,000. Noy considered the property a good investment. It was always also cheaper and safer than a hotel, and the Brinks-Mat gang had befriended many detectives in both the Kent Force and the Met long before the robbery actually took place. Some of them had even asked the CID functions and parties held inside the police stations. Naturally, many of those officers who knew the gang members were now stepping back from the investigation, fearful that they might be smeared by the robbers and their associates. Out and about in their favourite pubs in southeast London and Kent, the remainder of the Brinks-Mat gang tried to gauge the intensity of the police investigation by speaking to certain second division criminals, many of whom had their own contacts in the police. Noy and his criminal associates got close to the remaining three members of the Brinks-Mat robbery team during this period, although they were careful to ensure that the Brinks-Mat investigators did not observe them doing anything in connection with the stolen bullion. On one occasion during the early stages of the investigation, Kenneth Noy and a number of other criminal faces attended the marriage of the daughter of one of the southeast London's best-known villains. A wedding photographer innocently started snapping away at Noy and some others. Noy immediately lost his temper, pushed the photographer up against the wall, and removed the film from his camera. He had a particular aversion to having his photo taken, even at a public function such as a wedding. In this instance, Noy suspected the photographer might have been in a policeman in disguise. Okay, I'm just going to quickly address the chat. Okay. Hello there, Gianni. Good to see you. Joe Delamora, thank you. Always a pleasure, sir. Good to see you. Okay. As his cousin Michael later told his author, Kenny didn't like any photos of himself to be floating around. He knew that if the people outside his own circle didn't know what he looked like, then he'd be able to move around much more easily. Now, despite the care he was taking, Noy was considered a bit of a bumpkin by certain members of the actual Brinks-Mat robbery gang. After all, he'd never got his hands dirty carrying out the actual raid. He was simply there to turn the gold into cash. Now, as Kathy McAvoy, Mickey's second wife, later explained, Noy wasn't from South East London. He was from the Kent suburbs, and that just isn't the same. Bexley Heath ain't South East London in the true sense. Noy wasn't the real thing, and he knew that the others thought that too. There was also a feeling amongst some of the Brinks-Mat faces that outsiders like Noy might not keep the code of honour that existed between the team involved in the actual robbery. Now, at the same wedding where Noy threatened the photographer, he was seen along his old mate, Brian Reeder, one of South East London's most notorious burglars. The two men had done some gold business together in 1981. They ended up earning themselves at least 200 grand each. No wonder they both believed that they could clean up once they had their hands on all the Brinks-Mat gold, and the remaining members of the Black Brinks-Mat gang and its backers sat tight for the moment, believing that nothing was going to prevent them from eventually coming into a fortune. They began looking around for safe, straight investments for the cash that they believed would be raised from the gold. Some of them even began selling off their own legitimate businesses, so that it gave them a perfect alibi for having so much cash swimming around. Now, as one ex-robber explained, the cozzers were watching everyone closely, and so selling the business provided a legitimate reason to be in the money, so to speak. It was a wise move, and it frustrated the police no end because they knew who was connected to the job, but they had fuck all proof. Now, friends and family of the remaining robbers were kept in the dark about the sudden surge in transactions, although inevitably word stated to get around that some of the robbers who had escaped prosecution were falling into the classic trap of being too flash for their own good. Now, in Scotland Yard, there is unsigned statement allegedly made by suspected robber Tony White, in which he not only admits to being on the robbery, but wonders whether he can take the 2 million reward if he returns his share of the gold. Now, in this statement, White is also said to have read Black's confession and told the police, "I agree with the fucking thing, but I can't remember who done what or where. Can't we leave it at that?" This is what this was before the police were required to tape record the interviews. And at this later trial, White would claim that the statement was a police fiction. When Scotland Yard were asked to produce the relevant copy of Black's confession to see if White had left his fingerprints on it, they first claimed to have mislaid it, but eventually confirming that they had the copy and destroyed it for security reasons. Now, whilst this was going on, Kenneth Noy and his associates had formed an offshoot of the Brinks-Mat gang that was busily working on how to turn all the gold into cash. Soon Noy and his mob would be generating a virtual torrent of money. In the 4 months following the robbery, one bank handled transactions of more than 10 million, mainly in grubby plastic bags, no questions asked, to make it safe for use. It had to be carefully laundered to avoid being traced back to the raid. And in the middle of all this, the Sweeney just couldn't fathom out how the gold was being turned into cash. The villains were taking the mickey out of Scotland Yard, and it was really riling various high-powered officers. Now, two-time Brinks-Mat guard Tony Black was quickly sentenced to 6 years imprisonment. With remission for good behaviour, he wouldn't serve more than 4 years and was likely to get parole just after 2. Now, the sentence was accompanied by a grim warning from the judge, David Tudor Price. Never again will your life be safe. In custody, you will be segregated at all times, and you and your family will forever be fugitives from those you so stupidly and so wickedly helped. Commander Frank Cater told the court that the prisoner's own safety, he wanted Black to spend the time leading up to the trial of the 3 alleged robbers in police custody rather than in prison. Now, the chief of detectives was utterly determined that nothing should stop Black from giving evidence when the time came. The application, which had been sanctioned at a senior level after talks between Deputy Assistant Commissioner Calland and the Home Office was readily granted. Okay, just stop there. Hello, Joe Delamora. Good to see you. Okay, so on Monday, the 25th of October, 1985, White, Robinson, and McAvoy were brought before Judge Tudor Price at the Old Bailey, the Central Criminal Court, to answer two counts, such as those of conspiring to commit robbery and of the robbery itself. All three pleaded not guilty. Then Tony Black, nicknamed the Golden Mole by the tabloids, stepped into the witness box and spent the following 2.5 days giving evidence. He gave the court a full account of how Robinson persuaded him to help the gang and the subsequent meetings and phone calls that took place both before and after the robbery. Black admitted he was scared for his life. By the time he'd finished there was no doubt that Robinson and McAvoy had been the two criminals Black had dealt with. But Black's testimony provided little or no evidence against White, and none of the other guards had managed to identify him. White's extremely skillful counsel, John Matthey QC, also strongly changed the accuracy of a statement White allegedly gave the police after his arrest. When it was discovered that the logbook from Heathrow police station containing the alleged statement had gone missing, it's also seriously undermined the prosecution's attempt to prove a case against White. Now, the trial itself garnered enormous nationwide publicity, which fueled the legendary status of the Brinks-Mat robbery. It was portrayed in many papers as cops versus robbers struggle. Behind the scenes, the police knew their investigation had been far from successful, and they continued to knock doors down, trying to follow up any lead, any source that had in a bit of to trace the gold and the rest of the criminals. Now, when the media dubbed it the crime of the century, it rankled with many detectives who felt that they were far from finishing their inquiries. After a long month trial, Judge Tudor Price explained to the jury that he would be summing up the case under 5 headings. The first would be the robbery itself and the controversial evidence of the 5 honest guards. That would be followed by the consideration of Anthony Black's confessed involvement. Parts 3, 4, and 5 would deal the case against each of the accused. At 10:42 on Thursday, the 29th of November, 1984, Tudor Price brought his careful and thoughtful summing up to an end. "Members of the jury," said the judge, "in this case, allegations have flowed thick and fast, and it is for you to decide which ones have substance. It wasn't until 3:19 p.m. the following Sunday that the jury finally returned with a verdict. White was found not guilty. McAvoy and Robinson, however, were found guilty of the robbery. All verdicts were delivered with a majority of 10-2. Next morning, the 2 robbers were each sentenced to 25 years imprisonment without parole. Robinson, aged 41, would be 66 when due for release, and McAvoy, 33, would be 58. Yet both men replied to their sentences with a simple and polite thank you. Back at home in southeast London, Tony White broke his silence to a waiting horde of reporters. "If I'm innocent, then the other 2 are innocent. The evidence was the same for all of us. None of the 3 of us were involved. The reason the police pulled us in is because they've wanted us for a long time, and we're waiting for something like this to get us." For Black, Robinson, McAvoy, and White, the Brinks-Mat job was over. But as far as the police and many of the others connected to the crime of the century were concerned, it was only just the beginning. So we're seeing that now that the Robinson and McAvoy are being convicted, but it's all going to spiral out of control. Now, 2 days after Robinson and McAvoy were jailed at the Old Bailey, one of their criminal associates, Garth Chappell, withdrew £348,000 from the account of a company called Scandalin at Barclays Bank in Bedminster, Bristol. Over the next 3 weeks, he took out another 1.1 million from the same account. The withdrawals had actually been going on throughout the trial, In total, about 13 million had been sitting in the account of Scadlin. The money was laid out by the respectable gold merchants such as Johnson, Matthey and Engelhard as payment for large amounts of gold. Unbeknownst to the buyers, this had been smelted from the high-grade Brinks-Mat gold using the smelter purchased from the foundry in Worcestershire and driven to Kent in the gold Rolls Royce. Mixed with copper to disguise its origins, the assay office in Sheffield, which was responsible for handing out hallmarks to jewellers and gold merchants, had been an unwitting accomplice in the laundering of the gold, even awarding Scadling a seal of approval, which effectively gave the dirty gold a clean bill of health. I'm just going to stop there. Tinu, here we go. Good to see you. Tommy Stiggs, thank you for coming. Hello there, Miss Cranky. Good to see you. I'm glad you're all here. Thank you. Okay. Right. So the main player behind the smelting of the gold, besides Ken Noy, was a 30-year-old businessman from Bath called John Palmer. Now, Roscoe shouted him out earlier in the chat. Goldfinger, John Palmer. He's a character, and I'll cover on a later date. So later, John was dubbed Goldfinger for his alleged involvement in the handling of the Brinks gold. Amazingly, he would at one stage be ranked alongside the Queen in 105th position on the Sunday Times Rich list. But it wasn't just Noy who was active. The three other members of the actual Brinks-Mat robbery gang who had not been apprehended began coming out the shadows in order to make sure they got their share of what they believed was rightfully theirs. But their way of asserting their position risked drawing the wrong kind of attention upon themselves. Suspected robber Brian Perry and his associate Gordon Perry began taking flights to Jersey, the Isle of Man, Switzerland, Spain, and the United States. Other members of the gang and their associates began purchasing big houses in Britain, which naturally alerted the so far powerless authority to their financial affairs. Now, as one investigator later explained, they should have just sat on it and invested it discreetly, but in the end, they couldn't resist chucking their cash around. So back on the mean streets of southeast London, various firms continue to carry out armed robberies. Sources inside the underworld have confirmed to this author that members of the Brinks-Mat team helped finance some of these smaller black-ins. Now, the Brinks-Mat robbery was already influencing everything from crime to property prices. In places such as the London Docklands, warehouses were suddenly at a premium because a number of them had already been bought with proceeds of the robbery. Now, at this point, the dramatic aftermath of the so-called crime of the century was only just beginning to reveal itself. So in November 1984, a year after the robbery, South London villain Brian Reader met up with old friend Kenneth Noy and Noy's wife Brenda at a squash club in Dartford, Kent, where they discussed on how to convert yet more of the Brinks-Mat gold into cash. This time they agreed the price would be 3% above the fixed price, the price of which gold is sold at on the bullion markets, and that deliveries of the gold would start after Christmas. But because of the number of forgeries flooding the market at that time, the payment would be made in new £50 notes that could be easily verified. Hello there, ALV. Hello, Asada. Good to see you both. Krumel, thank you. Thank you for coming. Now, with the middleman Reader happy to pay for the gold on these terms, it was clear that the VAT fraud was being committed. Now, Kenneth Noy was also well aware for such a complex operation, which needed dozens of people to run it, required high levels of organisation, and Noy should have been perfectly happy making over £1 million a year out of his own lucrative role in handling the gold. After all, it had the potential to go on for years without any hindrance. But then he got greedy. And that's what the word started going out, that Noy was the man. In other words, Noy was handler number one, the man who was now responsible for turning most of the gold into hard cash. Now, by early January 1985, Brian Reeder alone was reckoned to have handled Brinks-Mat gold that had come through Noy worth £3.66 million. It was being smuggled to Britain from Holland, where it had taken the raid as part of a complex additional earner involving VAT fraud on the gold itself. In all the Tupperware lunchboxes of various lorry drivers who worked for haulage company with close links to one of Noy's oldest friends. The driver took their vehicles to the quayside and left them to be shipped over to Britain unaccompanied. With the Tupperware boxes still on board, British drivers then picked up the lorries when they arrived and took them to their destination. Next, Reeder would collect the gold and take it back to his home in southeast London, from where Noy would pick it up a few days later. Now, it seemed like a perfect system to the two men, and they'd convinced themselves that they were on the verge of making more money than most people could ever dream of. But when it comes to crime, there's always a problem lurking around each corner. Okay. Now, to maintain the effective surveillance operation against Brinks-Mat handlers Noy and Reeder, Scotland Yard needed to carefully reinforce their Brinks-Mat inquiry team. Following the successful convictions of Robinson and McAvoy, it had been reduced to just 20 officers. Now, a senior detective was drafted in to take charge of the investigation and build up the squad to full strength once more. The man was acting Detective Chief Superintendent Brian Boyce, a former member of the anti-terrorist squad who had actually assumed the promotion opportunities had long since passed him by. Boyce, the son of a West End barrow boy, had one ambition on entering the police service, and that was to become a top detective at Scotland Yard. Having achieved that aim, he was the commander, Frank Cater, when the Craytrins were arrested. He was with the commander. He had no desire to swap the gritty life of a detective out on the streets for the cosier confines to higher office, complete with never-ending bureaucracy and Whitehall constantly breathing down his neck. Brian Boyce had an air of determined independence about him. He was an accomplished jazz musician, a mountaineer of considerable prowess, and a man with strong interest in comparative religion. His was a professionalism born of sheer love for the job. He was also an officer who inspired great loyalty among Scotland Yard's elite detective force. Now, during this national service, 26 years earlier in Cyprus, where he tracked down the EOKA guerrillas, Boyce had picked up some vital experience on surveillance and intelligence gathering. Knowledge he was able to use on the Brinks-Mat case. Boyce insisted that both Noy and Reeder were put under even more rigorous surveillance in an operation that initially was only to involve C8 officers. Now, C8 was the new title for the flying squad, though few people used it. Okay. Now, on Tuesday, the 8th of January, 1985, detectives moved into a position in a row of bushes by the public road in West Kingsdown, near the entrance of a long driveway to Kenneth Noy's home, which was Hollywood Cottage. Now, within minutes at 9:05 a.m., they watched as Brian Reeder's green Vauxhall Cavalier left Noy's home and drove back to his own house. 20 minutes after arriving, Reeder left his house in Grove Park, shadowed by 4 unmarked flying squad cars. He drove to Cocos Street in central London, close to Hatton Garden. He then parked up outside Farringdon Underground and the mainline railway station, and went to a telephone booth in the ticket hall to make a call. One detective managed to walk close enough to Reeder to see the phone number he was dialing. It turned out to belong to a nearby shop. Reeder then walked out onto the street, looked up and down, returned to the phone, and then dialed the number again. The same thing happened once more before Reader left the station and went into a cafe on the opposite side of the road. Two detectives watched from a distance as Reader sat at the table in the booth with the other two men. Now, one of them was 24-year-old Tommy Adams, an asphalter by trade, but one who also happened to be a member of the notorious Adams family from North London. They had been brought in as decent handlers who would help provide a route for the gold to be turned into cash. Now, the other man was a well-known fringe figure around Hatton Garden, a gold dealer called Christopher Wayman, who ran a business called Lustretone Limited in Grayville Street. Reader wrote something down on a piece of paper, which he showed to the two men. Next, the three of them left the cafe and walked across the road to Reader's car. Adams leaned in and brought out what looked to be an unusual heavy oblong parcel which was 1 foot long. Adams then placed the parcel carefully in the boot of a nearby white Mercedes sports car, which Adams and Wayman drove away in. Meanwhile, back at Hollywood Cottage, other detectives saw a Ford Granada belonging to Kenneth Noy's friend Michael Lawson drive up to the house. The Granada was being driven by a man aged about 20. The same car left soon afterwards and was later spotted outside Nor's former home in Heather Avenue, which was in West Kingsdown, less than a mile away. That house was now owned by John Littlelegs Lloyd, one of the members of the Brinks-Mat gang who had never been apprehended by the police. Now, that Tuesday afternoon, Kenneth Noy was seen leaving Hollywood Cottage with another man in a blue Range Rover. Once again, CA officers followed them from a discreet distance. After 12 miles, they watched the Range Rover turn off the A20, which was a Sidcup bypass in the secluded car park off the Beaver Wood Club, a Spanish hacienda-style nightclub set back from the road behind a screen of trees. Now, Noy stayed for 5 minutes before driving off again. Although the police did not realise at the time, this was a special secret rendezvous spot used by Noy to meet Ryder away from the prying eyes. Police were in no doubt that Noy was the key to the distribution of the Brinks-Mat gold, but they knew that they had to move in closer to observe Noy if they wanted to gather concrete evidence. That would require a highly specialised team of undercover officers who could remain outside for long periods of time, no matter what the conditions. As a result, C11 officers from the Met Special Surveillance Unit took up position near Noy's house in West Kingsdown. They were a hand-picked group, no more than 8 in total, who had been trained in reconnaissance and close target surveillance by specialists from the SAS. The C11 team training course included hiding beneath floorboards for 3 days at a time in a gap just 18 inches high, and spending a similar length of time dug into a hole in the ground in the open countryside. No, sorry, Janie, this is the robbery took place in 1983, so this is all sort of the early 80s to the mid 80s. Now, because Kenneth Noy lived in Kent, approval had to be obtained from the Kent Police Force since the operation was on their territory, and that threw up different set of problems. When the Met had arrested Kenneth Noy back in 1977 for receiving stolen goods, they had done so without the knowledge of the local force because they were all aware that Noy had friends there. His relationship with certain Kent officers had long been of great concern to the Met. So it was decided that only the highest ranked Kent officers should be put fully in the picture. Now, the C11 surveillance team working near Noy's house in West Kingsdown established a secret command centre in a ground floor room in the Stackman's Retreat House, a convalescent home for Anglian Anglican clergymen opposite the entrance to Noy's home, which was situated on a quiet wooded school lane. A hideout made from the branches and leaves was carefully constructed in bushes under an oak tree near the gates to the retreat, so that round-the-clock observation could be carried out on Hollywood Cottage. Now, just above the cast iron gates that formed to the entrance to the driveway to Noy's home, a video camera disguised as a bird box was placed in the overhanging tree. Meanwhile, on the roadside, outside Reader's house over in Grove Park, a variety of vehicles were used to keep watch. Now, at midday, on the day after C11 first moved into position, Brian Reader drove from his home in Grove Park to the Crest Hotel in Bexley, where Kenneth Noy was already waiting in a Range Rover. How you doing, babe? What's so good to see you? As Reader's Cavalier approached, Noy did a U-turn and then drove off towards London. Reader immediately followed, and not long afterwards, the two vehicles turned into a side road and parked. Now, C11 Detective Constable Minor Yates, 36, shadowed the pair on foot and remained hidden from view, watched as Noy handed Reader a black briefcase. Now, the following day, Noy and Reader again met at lunchtime in the car park at the Beaverwood Club. 15 minutes later, Reader departed, and police shadowed WDC Yates followed him to the Royal National Hotel. Now, this was in Bedford Way, Bloomsbury, in central London. WDC Yates followed him into the hotel lobby to find Reader sitting at a table talking to Christopher Wayman and Tommy Adams, the same men he had met a few days earlier at Farringdon Station. 10 minutes later, they drove off in the same white Mercedes. C11 officers tailed the Mercedes through the North London to Paddington railway station. Adams was carrying what appeared to be a very heavy brown briefcase, and both he and Wayman seemed agitated. They made 2 telephone calls, then brought 2 first-class rail tickets and boarded a train for Swindon, 80 miles away from west of London. Now, on board the train with them were 3 surveillance officers. On arrival at Swindon Station, Wayman made several phone calls. Then the 2 men sat and waited. Eventually, they got up, shook hands, and waved to each other as though they were about to part company. One moved off, only to be followed at a distance by the other, a deliberate ploy to try and establish if someone was following them. Further down the road, the 2 men met up again and headed for a fish and chip bar in the street opposite the station. Eventually, a black Jaguar XJS pulled up. Inside it was Garth Chappell, the 42-year-old managing director of Scadlin, the bullion company to which so much of the gold had already been delivered. Chappell was with Terence Patch, a Bristol businessman who occasionally worked with the company. Now, Adams and Wayman immediately placed the heavy briefcase in the boot of the Jag. It sped off with detectives following back to Scadlin, which was based in North Street, Bedminster, a rundown area of Bristol. Now, at about 6:30 p.m, Adams and Wayman returned by train to Paddington Station. They were clutching another briefcase. This time, C11 shadows followed the 2 men as they got into the same car, the white Mercedes from earlier, and they drove to Russell Square in central London, where Wayman handed the briefcase to Colin Reader. Now, the following day, Reader made yet another visit to the car park of Beaverwood Club near Kenneth Noy's house in Kent. Reader made a phone call from a public call box and stayed in the car park for just 8 minutes this time. Then the trail went cold for almost a week, as none of the suspects did anything to alert the attention of the police surveillance operation. Now, 6 days later, Brian Reader made an evening visit to Ken Noy's home in Hollywood Cottage. Next, he drove to Cocos Street, where once again he was met by the white Mercedes. This time a man got out of the murk and leaned into Reader's car while he examined some papers, but their C11 shadows couldn't make out what was being said. Eventually, the man returned to his Mercedes and drove off. Police almost immediately lost the car in the thick of the London traffic. Now, 5 days after this, Reader paid yet another visit to Cocos Street, where he met Tommy Adams in the cafe they used before. 25 minutes after a London black cab pulled up, Wayman and a man wearing a brown sheepskin jacket got out, both carrying boxes. Tommy Adams emerged from the cafe and opened the boot of his sports car, where the boxes were then placed. The group adjourned to the cafe for 30 minutes, then the boxes were transferred to the boot of Reader's car. Reader, followed by a C11, then headed out to London to Noy's home at Hollywood Cottage in West Kingsdown. Now, the following day, Reader once again to the same cafe in Cocos Street. This time, he was seen talking to an acquaintance who was a jeweller and who had been long suspected by the police for being a fence for stolen goods. While the two men were talking, the white Mercedes drew up and Wayman entered the cafe, where Reader got something quite small wrapped in green Marks and Spencer's carrier bag from his pocket, and it was placed on the table between them. Keeping his hands resting carefully on the package, Wayman then handed an envelope to Reader, who immediately let go of his package, as he'd already done several times. Reader went back to Noy's house, where he stayed briefly before heading home. But within 15 minutes of arriving back at his own house in Grove Park, Reader drove back to the Royal National Hotel again. He rejoined the jeweller from earlier that day and sat looking out the window until the white Mercedes arrived again. As soon as it pulled up, Reader and the jeweller left the hotel and they joined Wayman. The three of them walked across to Reader's Cavalier. Adams, who had left his sports car to join them, was handed a large package wrapped in brown paper, which he dropped into his own car before moving off. Adams then headed for the M4 motorway. An hour and a half later, he took junction 15, the Swindon turn-off, and 200 yards further on pulled into a car park of the Plough, a small country pub. Adams parked directly behind the Jaguar, previously seen by C11 outside Scadlin Limited. Now, both of the cars were opened, and a group of men clustered around the two Mercedes. Two men lifted a heavy object out of the boot and transferred it to the Jaguar. Surveillance officers knew it had to be the gold. The Jaguar then left the pub car park and headed westwards with C11 in a discreet pursuit. Now, the car went off the Bath exit of the motorway, but was soon lost in the maze of twisting country lanes close to where one of the suspects had lived. Now, the next morning, detectives saw it parked outside Scadlin. On the following Thursday evening, Brian Reader once again visited the Royal National Hotel. This time, Wayman appeared with a large brown leather briefcase with fold-over flaps. Reader took the case to Kenneth Noy's house later that same night. The police surveillance had no doubt that huge amounts of the Brinks-Mat gold were on the move. Okay. Now, after almost 3 weeks of surveillance, Operational Commander Brian Boyce gave a briefing in the South London police station to 20 or so officers who had been involved in the operation so far. On the basis of the data collected, warrants were obtained from a London magistrate for raids on 36 addresses in Kent, London and the Bristol area. But that didn't necessarily mean the raids would happen instantly. Boyce believed that all or part of the 26 million worth of Brinks-Mat gold was at Noy's home, Hollywood Cottage, but he couldn't be absolutely certain because a number of transactions involving Reader had been somewhat confusing. Reader had been seen handing over heavy packages, but he had also received some, which he'd taken to Noy's home. Was it possible that Reader was also acting as a conduit to Noy from some other source, delivering the gold to Hollywood Cottage for some kind of processing before handling it further down the chain? There was also another dilemma for Brian Boyce and his senior detectives. If the flying squad postponed some of the raids, would those people who hadn't been arrested think that they had escaped detection and unwittingly lead the police to more of the Brinks-Mat bullion at a later date. Brian Boyce had three options. Now, he could pounce on Noy's house at West Kingsdown and then decide what to do about London or Bristol, or he could intercept the gold at Scadlin and follow up with further raids in Kent and London. But his final choice was simply to move in while the gold was actually in transit and then decide which raids to carry out. Boyce concluded that the movements of Reader and Noy would determine which of these three options he chose. Meanwhile, the Special Surveillance Unit would continue their observation of Hollywood Cottage to provide the most detailed information possible on movements. Now, CA officers work on constant standby at the retreat house to remain in contact with the C11 post. A second C8 team was posted close to Reader's home in Grove Park, with a third placed in central London and a fourth taking up position in the M4 area west of London. Now, a small fifth was to be kept mobile, ready to back up when and where it was required. Now, Boyce set a time limit of 72 hours for this operation. Now, this meant they had to move in at some point without that time span, otherwise it would be aborted. Frustratingly, it was primarily the cost of the police overtime, and that made this a necessity. Now, another factor was the 72 hours was the maximum time for surveillance officers could be expected to remain hidden and continue to be competent. Now, although Boyce and his senior officers had just been informed by their Kent colleagues that Noy kept firearms at Hollywood's cottage, Boyce decided that none of his men would be armed. Boyce saw no actual evidence that his officers' lives would be in danger. Noy's shotguns, he felt, were not kept for criminal purposes, but they were part of a Kent country squire image he had been trying to build for himself in West Kingsdown. Furthermore, Brian Boyce believed that in this instance they were also dealing with the middlemen, not the robbers themselves. Boyce's decision was also influenced by the outcry 2 years earlier that Stephen Waldorf, a film editor, was shot 5 times and seriously wounded in a London street after being mistaken for a violent criminal. Brian Boyce had been working at C11 at the time and was one of the officers responsible for authorising the arming of police officers who pulled the trigger. One last factor behind Brian Boyce's decision was that if the armed officer of one force entered the jurisdiction of another, the chief constable of the second force had to be informed immediately and provide armed officers from their own men as backup. There remained a real fear that someone in the Kent police might tip off Noy about the surveillance operation, as Boyce wanted to confine knowledge of it to as few people as possible. Now, Brian Boyce couldn't know for certain, that the gold was hidden in Noy's house itself or somewhat in the grounds. He was aware that there were a number of concrete bunkers in the garden where the gold might be stored. Another problem was that the gates to Noy's mansion were also kept locked and could only be opened by remote control after callers had been identified after closed-circuit television systems. Now, Boyce did not want to give the occupants a warning of a raid. He feared that they would flee or hide incriminating evidence in the grounds while police were still trying to get in. Boyce's observations to his C11 specialist struck as nothing out of the ordinary. This was the kind of work they had been trained for, but even the best laid plans were always at the mercy of unforeseen circumstances. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut that there because I know this is too much information overload, and I did say that I'm going to break this down into parts for you all. So I just want to take the time for thank you for tuning in and listening. Bay Watcher, great to see you. Crewmel, Paul, as always. I know this will go on a bit, but I want to get all the information out right. Also, I just want to know, does anyone have any questions at all? If anyone's still in the chat. How you doing, Dave T? Good to see you. Let's see if anyone has any questions. Thank you, Paul. Okay. Let's do who we got. Okay, it's just just me and you, Paul. I think we've got someone else in with us. Hello there. Thank you for coming, BK Skip. Thank you. I'm just trying to break it down in chunks so I don't overload you. I know as well that like I say, we've got everyone wants to go over and see Joe the Skinny podcast and getting Joey's chat with Snuff. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Mike F. Thank you, Joe Tack. Good to see you guys. Actually, just while you're there, if you all three of you, okay, do me a favour. Okay, just got to do that. Where's Joe Town? Right there, but okay, Mike F, Joe Town, BK. If you just type, oh, there you go, BK. You've got it. Excellent, good, my man. That's all right. That's good. I say I just try and get everyone that I see in here quite regularly. Once other people start coming in regularly, I just want to make sure you're all there so you can protect the chat and protect yourselves, and also no one can spoof you. Right. So if no one's got any questions, just want to leave that there. So we're over to Skinny's in an hour. Like I say, guys, as well, please also remember to drop your links. Those of you that have got chats. Like I say as well, I want to give a big shout out, a big thank you to Team Do. A big shout out to Tommy Stiggs. Please check out their channel. And everyone, please feel free. So it's always good to see you all. Right, if anyone's got any questions, gone. Thanks, Paul. Right, over and out. Thank you, everyone. And I'm gonna have a break tomorrow, Paul. Break tomorrow, so I might probably get it on again for Wednesday. But my voice box is going. All right. Thank you all for coming.